Under the shadow of his own legend, Darth Vader led the Imperial armies with ruthless efficiency. Planets full of life and forests were burned under his orders. Rebellions were crushed without mercy. Insurgent leaders were dragged before him and executed with the Force in front of terrified crowds. On Jeddah, he oversaw the destruction of an ancient sanctuary during a religious ceremony, silencing forever the voices that cried for freedom. But even in the face of victory, something gnawed at his soul. With every scream, every look of terror, an invisible pain emerged, a growing weight that not even absolute power could suppress. The armor, his living prison, became unbearable. The mechanical limbs, the forced respirators, the wounds hidden beneath the cold metal, every night was a martyrdom. When he removed the helmet for mandatory medical care, he faced in the reflection the monster he had become. The burned skin, the skull marked by deep scars, the weary eyes, and beneath it all, the shame. He remembered Mustafar, the fire, Obi-Wan screaming that he was the chosen one, and now he was merely an instrument of fear. Each physical pain reopened the spiritual wound, the awareness that this was not a just punishment, but the reflection of his own choice. Amid emotional collapse, Vader began a desperate search. He scoured ruins, ancient Sith archives, and records lost to time. He wanted more than power. He wanted relief. A name began to appear among the whispers of the past. The Dark Lord who mastered the manipulation of life and death. Vader followed traces to forgotten places. Caves of the Outer Rim, sealed crypts on the planet where the Sith first emerged, ancient libraries on destroyed worlds. And there, in the dust of an abandoned Jedi temple, he found what he did not expect. Ancestral scrolls, written not by Sith, but by Jedi who studied the frontiers of the impossible. The text spoke of a regeneration technique, forbidden from manipulating both sides of the Force. The necessary balance required the practitioner to confront not only their pain, but their sins, with compassion. Vader read and reread in silence. It was a promise, but also a challenge to his identity. He would need to destroy what had made him strong. He would need to accept himself as Anakin. That terrified him. Still, the seed had been planted. In the next meditation cycle, he made his decision. And then, like a shadow fading, he vanished from the galaxy. Communications ceased. Palpatine felt the loss and in fury sent probes and hunters to hundreds of systems. They found nothing. Vader had taken refuge on a nameless world, covered by a dense, ancient forest where the Force flowed in balance. There, among giant roots and crystal-clear lakes, he built a simple shelter with his own hands. He left the suit aside, keeping only the vital modules. He breathed with difficulty, but on his own. For weeks, he only meditated and observed. Animals, cycles of rain, the movement of leaves. For the first time, he commanded nothing. He began the technique's practices by facing minor wounds. He meditated on the Tusken massacre. He relived every strike, every cry, even the children's. His hands trembled. Whispers emerged around him. The Force responded, subtly. A gentle flow enveloped him, warm, yet melancholic. And then, silence. Nothing in his body changed. The days turned to cycles, the cycles into months. Gradually, he dared more. He entered the darkest core of himself. The name Obi-Wan. For hours, he relived the duel on Mustafar. The words spoken, the cut, the fire, the pain, but also the sadness in his old master's eyes. He tried to justify himself, to lie to himself, until something gave way. He cried as he hadn't since Padme. I hated him because he loved me like a father, he whispered. That night, he felt the forest tremble. A six-legged animal approached and lay beside him. For the first time in years, Vader slept without nightmares. Over the weeks, he learned to live only on what nature provided and became cherished by most animals. They did not fear him for the scars on his burned and disfigured body, but forgiveness was a harder path than any battle. He remembered Alderaan, how he allowed the battle station to exist. The suffering of prisoners, the voices of pilots he silenced. Each memory returned like a blade, but he did not avoid them. With closed eyes, he dove into his mind and relived them. and each night he whispered to himself, "It was my fault, but I am more than that." It was like washing a wound with salt. But the more it hurt, the more something seemed to loosen. The force reacted like a breeze around him. No longer a scream, but a murmur of acceptance. He didn't ask for redemption. He only accepted that he couldn't change the past. But he could be different now. On a rainy morning sitting by a lake, he felt a growing warmth in his chest. His breath, once shallow, became deep. His fingers tingled. The old wounds began to pulse as if alive. He fell to his knees, gasping. The forest's energy converged. The force whispered in forgotten tongues. His whole body was overtaken by spasms. Blood dripped from his mouth. But he did not scream. He remained still, as if accepting the suffering as part of the healing. Light and shadow intertwined within him. For hours, he was in a trance. When he awoke, the smell of charred flesh was gone. His hands, once covered by metal plates and dead flesh, were clean. Color, skin, hair. He touched his face and realized there was no scar. He ran to the lake and removed the support mask for the last time. The water reflected what he never imagined he would see again. His eyes. Human. Without burns. Without deformities. The neck, once rigid, now was flexible. The chest, once ruled by pain, breathed freely. The lungs were healed. The prosthetics were still there, and he accepted that. But inside and outside, Anakin Skywalker had been reborn. And there, seeing his complete reflection in the water, he knew. It was the end of Vader, and the beginning of something new. Then he saw Vader's garments. The black suit rested before him like a corpse that never rots. Anakin stared in silence, feeling the symbolic weight of that metallic shell. There were all the scars of his soul, the screams of Mustafar, Padme's eyes fading, Palpatine's voice promising power in exchange for servitude. With calm breath, Anakin observed each piece. Each one felt like a farewell. He raised his hand, and the Force trembled. Then, with a firm motion, he crushed the suit. The mask shattered like old glass. The plates twisted with a metallic scream. It was the end of Vader. With bare hands, he dug the forest soil where he had lived. Deep roots intertwined with his fingers, as if nature itself understood what was happening. He buried the remains of the suit in a silent ritual. There were no words, only purpose. Around him, forest creatures watched with attentive eyes. Some winged, others crawling, all in sync with the energy he now radiated. In the days that followed, he lived in communion with that place. He drank from the rivers, slept under the stars, and listened to the whispers of the wind. Like Yoda in Dagobah, he became part of that world, and there, he learned the value of silence. For months, he lived as if time had ceased to exist. He awoke to the sound of branches, meditated under the shade of ancient trees. He needed nothing more. Until a change in the air alerted him. He felt the force tremble. Creatures fled. The roots whispered danger. And then he saw it. Imperial ships tore through the sky with metallic roars, bringing fire and destruction. Soldiers marched without mercy, knocking down everything in their path. The forest, his sanctuary, was under attack. Anakin didn't hesitate. He kept the red saber, not as a symbol of the past, but as a blade of justice, and ran toward the battle. The fight was brutal. Hidden among branches and shadows, he attacked like a ghost. He brought down vehicles with gestures, deflected blaster shots. And when the soldiers advanced, the forest creatures fought by his side. Thick-shelled wolves, birds sharp as blades, all moved by a single will, to protect their home. In a short time, the enemy was swept away. Among the wreckage, Anakin realized something greater. This was not just a forest, it was the galaxy, and the Empire was the fire that consumed it. It was time to extinguish it at the root. He departed alone for Coruscant. The city's pathways hadn't changed. He knew secret tunnels, old codes, maintenance routes that led him straight to the heart of power. Palpatine's palace was, as always, golden, oppressive, arrogant. But inside, it smelled of fear. Anakin reached the Chancellor's chambers unnoticed. When he opened the doors, he found the old Sith waiting. Palpatine smiled. "I felt your presence, my apprentice." But Anakin didn't reply. His calm eyes said everything. The duel began like a storm. Force lightning crossed the air, sinister bolts tearing the walls. Palpatine used mind tricks, illusions, shadows that screamed memories. Anakin resisted them all, advanced with firmness, deflecting attacks with a flick of the hand and returning them like waves. It was as if the Force itself flowed through his body without resistance. Every strike from the Emperor was broken, absorbed, nullified. When the red saber was no longer necessary, Anakin crushed it like he had the suit. Only his hands remained. But they were enough. With his palm extended, he enveloped Palpatine in a field of energy that paralyzed him. The old man roared, writhed, but could not escape. Anakin hurled him into columns, smashed him through panels, drove him into the marble floor with the force of his bones. There was no hatred, only serenity. It was the final judgment. When Palpatine tried one last attack, Anakin stopped it with a gesture. He approached, placed a hand on the enemy's chest, and with a silent impulse, the Sith's heart stopped. The body collapsed, lifeless. The Empire was finished. Without a word, Anakin carried the Emperor's body to the Senate. The floodlights turned on. Senators, soldiers, and citizens ran to see the figure approaching. He laid the corpse in the center of the chamber and turned his back. No words, no theatrical gesture. He sought no applause. He sought no public redemption. He was merely the instrument of the end. And as he had emerged from the shadows, so he returned to them. He vanished, without a name, without a face, without glory. The Empire fell without its pillar. Fragments rose, wars continued. But the darkness no longer ruled everything. Balance was slowly being restored. Days later, Leia Organa was brought to the place where the provisional leaders waited. She asked to see the body of the defeated enemy, but heard something more. She heard rumors. Whispers about a faceless man who had defeated the Emperor with his own hands. Curious, and moved by an inexplicable feeling, she set out in search of that silent savior. She found him at the edge of a mountain, watching the sunset. She approached, and even without knowing who he was, she thanked him. He said nothing. But when he looked at her, he smiled with a tenderness only a father could offer. Years later, another visitor arrived. Young, impulsive, with a saber built by inexperienced hands, guided only by intuition. Luke. The Force had led him. When Anakin saw the boy approaching through the forest path, something inside him awakened. It wasn't just the Force's connection. It was blood. It was destiny. Luke sat before him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. But when the son's gaze finally met the father's, there was no judgment, only recognition. Anakin began to train him in silence, using the forest as their temple. They were not Jedi, nor Sith. They were simply two beings trying to understand the galaxy and their place in it. The days were simple: meditation, conversation, occasional laughter. And in the midst of it all, Anakin understood that the Force had never abandoned him. It had simply waited for him to find himself again. Now, he was no longer the chosen one destined to destroy. He was the man who had learned to rebuild. And in the vastness of that green world, among roots and stars, he found the peace that had long been denied to him.